Once upon a time, in the vibrant city of Enugu, a young girl named Sandra lived with her parents and younger sister, Judy. At just 20 years old, Sandra had her whole life ahead of her. She was intelligent, hardworking, and deeply devoted to her family. Her father, Mr. Benjamin, was a loving man who worked as a secondary school teacher, while her mother, Mrs. Grace, was a seamstress with a warm smile that lit up any room. Despite their modest means, the family was happy, bound by love and resilience. Sandra had dreams of becoming a nurse. She often sat by the window at night, flipping through her old biology textbooks, imagining herself one day wearing the crisp white uniform. Judy, her 10-year-old sister, adored her and often followed her around, mimicking her every move. Life seemed perfect until the shadow of illness crept into their home. It started with her father's persistent cough. At first, they thought it was just a common cold. But as weeks turned into months, the cough worsened, and Mr. Benjamin grew weaker. Visits to the local clinic brought no answers until the day they were referred to a specialist in the city. The diagnosis hit them like a thunderbolt: cancer. Sandra watched her once strong father wither away before her eyes. His warm laughter became a faint memory, replaced by the haunting sound of labored breathing. Grace tried to stay strong, working extra hours to pay for his treatment. But the medical bills kept piling up. Sandra had to drop out of school to support the family. She took up small jobs washing clothes, cleaning houses, and selling snacks by the roadside. One night, as Sandra sat by her father's bedside, he held her hand and said, "Sandra, you are the pillar of this family now. Take care of your mother and Judy. Promise me." Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "I promise, Papa." A few weeks later, Mr. Benjamin passed away. The family was devastated. Grace cried every night, and Judy clung to Sandra, afraid to let her out of her sight. Sandra, though broken, knew she had to be strong. Her father's words echoed in her mind, "You are the pillar of this family." But tragedy wasn't done with them yet. A year after her father's death, Grace decided to visit her hometown to discuss some family matters. Sandra begged her to stay, but Grace insisted she would be back the same day. Hours later, a phone call shattered their world. There had been an accident. A truck had lost control and collided with a bus. Grace didn't survive. Sandra felt as though the ground had been pulled from under her. Losing her father was painful enough, but losing her mother was unbearable. At just 21, she was now responsible for Judy, who was too young to fully understand the weight of their loss. The days that followed were a blur of mourning and confusion. Relatives came and went, offering empty condolences and promises of support that never materialized. When the dust settled, Sandra realized they were truly on their own. With no steady income and bills piling up, Sandra knew she had to act fast. She sold her father's old motorcycle and her mother's sewing machine to pay for rent and buy food. It wasn't much, but it kept them afloat for a while. Judy would often cry at night, missing their parents. Sandra would hold her close, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "Don't worry, Judy. I'll take care of you. I'll make sure you go to school, just like Papa and Mama wanted." Sandra took on more jobs, often working from dawn till dusk. She learned to braid hair and even bake small pastries, which she sold at the market. Every naira she earned went toward Judy's education and their survival. She barely ate, often skipping meals so Judy could have enough. The struggle was immense, but Sandra refused to give up. She found solace in small victories: Judy passing her exams, a satisfied customer praising her handiwork, or a kind neighbor offering a helping hand. One day, as Sandra sat outside their small apartment, exhausted from the day's work, Judy came to her with a drawing. It was a crude sketch of their family: Sandra, Judy, and their parents smiling under a bright sun. At the bottom, Judy had written, "Sandra, you are my hero." Tears filled Sandra's eyes as she hugged her sister. In that moment, she realized that despite everything they had lost, they still had each other, and that was enough to keep her going. As the years passed, Sandra's hard work began to pay off. She saved enough money to rent a small shop where she started her own business selling clothes and other goods. Her resilience and determination inspired those around her, and soon, her small business flourished. Judy grew into a bright and confident young girl, excelling in her studies. She often told Sandra, When I become a nurse, I'll take care of you the way you've taken care of me. Sandra would smile and reply, as long as you're happy, that's all I need. Though life had dealt them a cruel hand, Sandra and Judy proved that with love, resilience, and determination, even the darkest days could give way to light. Sandra's life had always been a struggle, but she never gave up. Every day, she woke up early and stayed up late to make sure her younger sister, Judy, had everything she needed. They lived modestly in a small, run-down apartment, but they were content. Sandra worked tirelessly, running a small kiosk shop and taking on odd jobs to make ends meet. She learned the value of hard work, sacrifice, and dedication early on, and she was determined to keep her promise to her father to take care of Judy, no matter what. Judy, now 16, was a brilliant student. She had inherited her parents' natural intelligence, and Sandra saw so much of their potential in her. They had dreams for Judy. Sandra wanted her to finish school, go to university, and one day become someone important. But as Judy prepared for her senior secondary school exams, Sandra's life was about to face a new challenge. The exams were approaching fast, and Judy's school fees were due. Sandra knew they didn't have enough money for her sister's registration, but she was determined to figure it out. She often reassured Judy, telling her not to worry and that she would make sure she could sit for the exams with her classmates. But as the days passed, Sandra's heart grew heavy with the weight of her responsibilities. How could she let her sister miss out on this opportunity? One evening, after a long day at the shop, Judy came home in tears. "Auntie, next week the registration for the exams will end, and I haven't paid yet. I'm feeling bad. What if I can't write the exams? What will I do if I don't do it with my mates?" Judy asked, wiping her tears away. Sandra stood frozen in place, her heart sinking as she saw the fear in her sister's eyes. "Don't worry, Judy," she said, pulling her into a tight hug. "I'll make sure you sit for your exams. I promise. We'll figure this out." She kissed her sister's forehead and tried to remain hopeful, but deep inside, she knew they were running out of time and resources. The following day, as she sat alone in their small apartment, Sandra felt the pressure mounting. She had no idea where the money would come from. The thought of failing her sister, of not keeping her promise, was unbearable. That afternoon, Sandra decided to go to a neighbor for help. John was a young man in his early 20s who lived next door. He wasn't wealthy, but he seemed to have a little more than Sandra did. She went to his apartment, nervous but determined. When she explained her situation, he didn't hesitate to speak. "I don't have the money," John said, shaking his head, "but I can give it to you, if you're willing to. Sleep with me." Sandra's heart dropped at his words. She stared at him in shock, her mouth dry. It felt like the floor beneath her was vanishing. But as she turned to leave, doubt began to eat at her. If she didn't find a way to provide for Judy, if she failed to keep her word, what would happen to their future? Would her sister be pulled out of school? Would she lose everything she had worked so hard for? Sandra closed her eyes, her mind racing. The thought of doing something like this made her stomach churn, but she also knew what was at stake. She couldn't let her sister's dreams slip away because of something as small as money. She turned back to John, her voice low and filled with shame. "Okay, I'll do it. Please just transfer the money. I'll pay you back when I can." John smiled, a cold and arrogant smile that sent chills down her spine. He transferred the money into her account. Afterward, as she walked home, her heart weighed heavy. She had never imagined that she would find herself in a situation like this, using her body to solve a problem. When she entered their apartment, she saw Judy's face light up when she handed over the money. "Thank you, Sandra. I can pay for the exams. I'll write them with my mates," Judy exclaimed, throwing her arms around her. But despite her sister's joy, Sandra felt a deep emptiness inside her. She had done what was necessary, but at what cost? She barely slept that night, the shame of what she had done gnawing at her. But the thought of Judy's future kept her from falling apart. She had made a choice, and now there was no turning back. Weeks passed, and Judy sat for her exams, her bright smile a constant reminder of why Sandra had made such a painful decision. But as time went on, Sandra began to notice something wasn't right with her body. Her period, which had always been regular, was late. She tried to ignore it at first, dismissing it as stress. But after a few more days, Anxiety gripped her heart. One morning, she went to the local clinic. She didn't tell Judy, wanting to keep her worries hidden. The doctor ran some tests, and soon, the results were in. Sandra's hands trembled as the nurse told her the news. Pregnant. Sandra could barely hear the nurse's voice over the rush of blood in her ears. She was pregnant. After everything, after sacrificing so much for her sister, this was the price she had to pay. She left the clinic in a daze, her world spinning. How could this have happened? Was she now trapped in an even worse situation? How could she raise a child when she could barely take care of herself and Judy? When she returned home, Judy could see that something was wrong. "Auntie, what happened? Are you okay?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Sandra swallowed hard and forced a smile. "I'm fine, Judy. Just a little tired," she lied. But deep down, the truth of her situation was suffocating her. That night, as Sandra lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, she thought about everything she had done to ensure Judy's success. But now, she faced a new challenge, a challenge she didn't know if she was prepared for. The future was uncertain, and the burden of her choices pressed heavily on her heart. But one thing was clear. No matter what happened, she would continue to fight for her sister. She had promised her father she would never give up, and she wouldn't break that promise. Even if it meant facing her darkest fears, Sandra's world felt like it was collapsing around her. The weight of her actions, the confusion, and the shame all pressed down on her chest. Every day felt heavier than the last, and she couldn't escape the thoughts that constantly swirled in her mind. She had always taken pride in being strong, in providing for her sister Judy, but now, everything seemed to be falling apart. The small kiosk she had worked so hard for now felt like a distant memory. She hadn't even stepped into it for days. The thought of facing people, of pretending like everything was fine, seemed unbearable. Her eyes lingered on the small baby bump that was already beginning to show, a reminder of her fateful decision. She had always dreamed of a better life for Judy, a life free of hardships and struggles. But now, it seemed like she had dug herself deeper into a hole she couldn't climb out of. She paced back and forth in their small apartment, unsure of what to do next. Should she tell John? The man who had given her the money for Judy's exams. The man who had crossed the line that night. And who, in her desperation, she had turned to. Would he even care about her situation now? He seemed to be moving on with his life. What if he doesn't want to take responsibility? Sandra had never even thought about his relationship until now. But now that she was in this mess, the thought of it tore at her heart. Should I tell him? She asked herself. Or should I just keep this to myself and suffer alone? But if she kept it from him, she would never be able to provide for both Judy and the child she carried. The fear of raising a child in this mess, the fear of failing once again, gripped her. Finally, after days of wrestling with her thoughts, Sandra made up her mind. She would go to John and tell him. She had to face her reality, even if it was the hardest thing she had ever done. That evening, Sandra walked to John's apartment, her heart pounding in her chest. As she reached the door, she took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. She knocked gently, waiting for him to answer. When the door swung open, Sandra was greeted by a young woman, a stranger to her. The woman was about her age, with dark hair and a warm smile that immediately made Sandra feel out of place. "Hi, I'm Sandra," she said, trying to sound normal, but her voice quivered. "Is John around?" The woman smiled and nodded, though there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. Before she could speak, John appeared in the hallway. "Sandra," he said with a grin, "how are you?" Sandra froze, suddenly unsure of what to say. She swallowed hard and forced a smile. "I'm fine, John," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is she your sister?" she asked, gesturing toward the woman standing beside him. "No," John chuckled. "She's my fiancée. We're getting married next month." The words hit Sandra like a slap to the face. Fiancée, marriage. Sandra felt the blood drain from her face, her hands growing clammy as the weight of the situation sank in. "Fiancée?" Sandra echoed, her voice weak. "You're getting married next month?" John nodded, a smile on his face, completely unaware of the storm brewing in Sandra's mind. "Yes, we're really happy." Sandra froze, her mind racing. How could I have been so foolish? The man who had taken advantage of her when she was desperate was moving on with his life, and she was left with the consequences. She could feel her body go cold as disappointment. Betrayal and regret filled her chest. Sandra forced a smile, though it felt like the most painful thing she had ever done. I see. I just wanted to stop by and say hello. I'll be going now. She turned and walked away, the tears threatening to fall. As she left the building, the weight of the world crashed down on her. She had been foolish. She had let herself believe in something that wasn't real. She thought she could rely on John, but all he had given her was a temporary solution, one that had only led her further into a spiral of regret. When she got home, she couldn't hold it in any longer. She fell to her knees, her chest heaving with sobs. What was I thinking? She asked herself, tears streaming down her face. She felt so small, so alone. She had failed. She had failed her sister, and now she was failing herself. The thought of the baby inside her felt suffocating. It was the last thing she needed in her life, and yet it was growing inside her. She couldn't take care of it. She couldn't raise a child. She could barely take care of herself and Judy. She knew she had to make it stop. With trembling hands, Sandra found her way to the small pharmacy in the corner of the street. She had heard about the pills, the ones that could terminate a pregnancy, and she had made up her mind. She couldn't do this. She couldn't bring a child into this mess. The pharmacist handed her a packet of pills, warning her about the risks, but Sandra barely listened. She just wanted the pain to end. She went home and took the pills, hoping it would end the nightmare she had created. That night, she fell into a restless sleep, her body aching from the decision she had made. The next morning, she woke up to a nightmare worse than the one she had fallen asleep in. She felt an overwhelming sense of panic as she realized that something wasn't right. Her sheets were soaked in blood. She could barely sit up, her body weak and shaking. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her. She felt dizzy and disoriented. In a panic, she called for Judy. Judy rushed into the room, her eyes wide with fear. And Sandra, what happened? What's going on? She asked, her voice trembling. I don't know, Judy, Sandra whispered, her voice weak. I think I did something wrong. Judy helped Sandra to her feet, her own face pale with worry. Come on, we need to get you to the hospital, Judy said, trying to support Sandra as she stumbled toward the door. As they made their way to the hospital, Sandra could feel her body growing weaker with every step. This was it, wasn't it? She had made the wrong choice, and now she was paying the price. When they arrived at the hospital, the doctor quickly assessed Sandra's condition. After a series of tests and scans, the doctor sat them down, his face grim. You were lucky you came in when you did, he said. You almost lost your womb. You'll need to rest and recover for a while. Sandra felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had avoided the worst, but the guilt remained. She had made a decision that would haunt her forever. And no matter what, she knew that she had to be strong for Judy, the one person who still depended on her. In the days that followed, Sandra sank into a deep depression. She couldn't look at herself in the mirror without feeling ashamed. She regretted everything: the abortion, the lies, the choices she had made. She couldn't help but feel like a failure. The one person she was supposed to protect, her sister, was now carrying the burden of her mistakes. Judy, don't ever be like me, Sandra would whisper to her in the quiet moments. Don't ever make the mistakes I made. I want more for you. And as Sandra lay in bed, the weight of her actions threatening to suffocate her, she vowed that she would never let Judy experience the same pain. But she knew that her journey had just begun, and it would take everything inside her to make things right. Sandra sat by the window of her tiny apartment, her mind made up. I will be strong for myself and for Judy, she resolved, wiping the tears that threatened to fall. She couldn't afford to give up now. Her parents were gone, and there was no one else to lean on. The responsibility of raising Judy had fallen squarely on her shoulders, and she vowed to make sure her sister would never have to suffer. Sandra went back to her small kiosk the next day, determined to make the most out of it. She arranged her goods meticulously, engaging every customer with a smile that masked her inner struggles. Slowly but steadily, the income trickled in, and Sandra saved every naira she could against any future emergency. She took care of Judy as best as she could, buying her a new dress whenever she could afford it, ensuring her sister didn't feel neglected despite their circumstances. However, it hurt Sandra deeply that none of her siblings had ever checked on them since their parents passed. Not a single visit or phone call came from the people they once called family. One day, Judy came home with exciting news. "Auntie Sandra, I passed my JAM exams," she exclaimed, waving the results slip in the air. Sandra hugged her tightly, her face beaming with pride. "Oh, Judy, I'm so proud of you," she said, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. But as Judy began to talk excitedly about her admission to study nursing at the University of Nigeria, Sandra felt a pang of fear. Where will I get the money to send her to school? She wondered. Nursing was an expensive course, and the thought of how much it would cost to support Judy through university made her stomach churn. But Sandra refused to let her fear show. She hugged Judy again and said, "I will work hard, Judy. I promise you will go to school and make our parents proud." In the weeks that followed, Sandra worked tirelessly. She saved every penny she could spare and eventually managed to pay Judy's first-year fees. On Judy's matriculation day, Sandra wore her best dress and arrived at the university with a small cake and a bag full of groceries. "Auntie Sandra, you didn't have to do all this," Judy said, her voice trembling with emotion as she hugged her sister. Sandra smiled and wiped away a tear. "You've worked hard to get here, Judy. This is your moment, and I want you to enjoy it. You're going to make me so proud." As Sandra left the university that day, her heart swelled with pride, but the weight of her financial burdens pressed heavily on her. The road ahead was going to be tough, but she was determined to see Judy succeed. On her way back home, a sleek black car pulled up beside her. Startled, Sandra stopped and looked at the driver, a well-dressed man with a warm smile. "Good afternoon," he greeted. "Do you need a ride?" Sandra hesitated, but the man's friendly demeanor put her at ease. She accepted the offer, and as they drove, they struck up a conversation. "I'm Henry," the man introduced himself. "And you are?" "Sandra," she replied shyly. As they talked, Sandra discovered they had a lot in common. Henry was a successful businessman, and he admired Sandra's hard-working spirit as she shared snippets of her life. By the time they reached her neighborhood, Henry had already asked for her phone number. In the weeks that followed, Henry and Sandra grew closer. He visited her regularly and was impressed by her resilience and determination. One day, as he looked around her tiny apartment, he shook his head. "Sandra, someone as beautiful and hardworking as you shouldn't be living here," Henry said. Sandra blushed. "This is what I can afford for now," she said. Henry smiled. "Don't worry, I'll get you a better place." True to his word, Henry rented a bigger apartment for Sandra and even secured a larger shop for her business. Sandra was overwhelmed with gratitude. She knelt down that evening and thanked God for bringing Henry into her life. For the first time in a long time, Sandra felt a sense of relief. The fear of not being able to support Judy through university had started to fade, replaced by hope and gratitude. Months later, Henry surprised Sandra with another life-changing proposal. "I love you, Sandra," he said one evening as they sat together in her new apartment. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Sandra was speechless. Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Henry, I will marry you," she whispered. When Henry met Sandra's uncle to discuss the marriage, the reception was lukewarm. Her uncle and his family had distanced themselves from Sandra and Judy after their parents' death. But Sandra didn't care. She was determined to start her new life on her own terms. The traditional marriage ceremony was simple but beautiful. Sandra felt a sense of fulfillment as she stood beside Henry, surrounded by well-wishers. However, she decided to postpone the white wedding until Judy could be present. Through it all, Sandra remained grounded, remembering the journey that had brought her to this point. She was no longer the scared young woman struggling to make ends meet. With Henry's love and support, she felt ready to face the future with renewed strength and determination. Sandra stood before the mirror, smoothing the edges of her wedding gown. Her heart swelled with joy as she admired herself. The date of the white wedding had been fixed during Judy's holiday, just as planned. With her sister by her side, Everything felt complete. When Judy returned home from school for the wedding, she was amazed at how much Sandra's life had changed. Her sister, who once struggled to make ends meet, now radiated happiness and stability. "Auntie Sandra," Judy exclaimed, running to hug her. "Look at you. Your life is so beautiful now. I'm so happy for you." Sandra laughed, holding her tightly. "Thank you, my darling. And I owe so much of this to Henry. God brought him into my life at just the right time." Judy turned to Henry, who stood watching with a smile. "Thank you for changing my sister's life. You're a good man, and I pray God blesses you both abundantly." The week passed in a flurry of wedding preparations, and finally, the day arrived. Sandra and Henry exchanged vows in a simple but elegant ceremony. Family and friends gathered to celebrate their love, and the newlyweds couldn't stop smiling. It was a day filled with joy, and Sandra felt like she was living a dream. After the wedding, Judy returned to school, but not without Sandra making sure she was well taken care of. She gave Judy bundles of cash, foodstuffs, and even bought her a new phone. "You deserve all the good things in life, Judy," Sandra said as she hugged her sister goodbye. Judy promised to make her sister proud, and she kept that promise. Sandra watched with pride as Judy excelled in her studies, and when graduation day finally arrived, Sandra made sure it was a day to remember. On the day of the graduation, Sandra surprised Judy with the deed to a piece of land. She hugged her sister tightly, tears of pride streaming down her face. "I'm so proud of you, Judy," Sandra said. "Even Mom would be proud of you. Thank you for being different, for never disappointing me. You're now a mature young woman, and I know the future holds nothing but good things for you." Judy couldn't hold back her tears. "Auntie Sandra, I couldn't have done this without you. You gave up so much for me. Thank you for everything." Judy moved in with Sandra and Henry after her graduation. Henry, ever the supportive husband, used his connections to secure a good nursing job for Judy, ensuring she started her career on the right foot. Life seemed perfect, and Sandra finally felt a sense of peace. But the peace was short-lived. One evening, after returning from work, Judy approached her sister with a curious expression. "Auntie Sandra," she began hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," Sandra replied, putting away the dishes she'd been cleaning. Judy hesitated, then blurted out, "Is it that you don't want to have children yet, or are you finding it difficult to get pregnant?" Sandra froze, her hands trembling slightly. She let out a heavy sigh and turned to face Judy. "To be honest, Judy," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know what the problem is. I've done everything I can to get pregnant, but it's just not happening. Henry isn't complaining, but I can't help but worry. I think the abortion I had years ago is the reason for this." Judy's heart broke for her sister. She reached out and held Sandra's hands. "Auntie, don't say that. You don't know that for sure. And even if it's true, there's always a solution. I'll help you. Everything will be fine." True to her word, Judy began bringing home different supplements and traditional remedies for Sandra to try. She encouraged her sister, reminding her every day that miracles happen. But as the months passed, Sandra noticed a change in Henry's behavior. He started coming home late, always complaining about traffic or being overloaded with work. He barely spent time with her anymore, and Sandra couldn't ignore the growing distance between them. As an understanding wife, Sandra tried to keep the peace. She made sure the house was spotless, cooked his favorite meals, and ensured everything he needed was available. Yet, deep down, she felt a gnawing sense of unease. She sat alone one evening, staring at the dinner she had prepared. The food was getting cold, and Henry still hadn't come home. Sandra's mind raced with thoughts. Is this my fault? Is he upset because I can't give him a child? Sandra pushed the thoughts away, determined to stay strong. She had faced challenges before, and she would face this one too. But as the days turned into weeks, the cracks in her marriage grew wider, and Sandra couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Sandra hummed a happy tune as she parked her car in the driveway. The doctor's words echoed in her head. "Congratulations, you are pregnant." She couldn't wait to share the wonderful news with Henry and Judy. This was the miracle she had prayed for, the answers to her sleepless nights and endless worries. Balancing the box of groceries in her arms, she walked up to the door and knocked. She waited, but no one answered. She knocked again, this time louder, but still no response. Sandra's brows furrowed. Why is the door locked from the inside? She wondered. She knocked again, calling our Henry and Judy. Are you home? Silence. Feeling a twinge of concern, she set her groceries down and walked to the side of the house, where their bedroom window was. She was about to call out again when she heard voices inside. The first voice she heard stopped her in her tracks. It was Judy. It's time to tell her the truth, Henry. I'm pregnant already and there's nothing I can do about it. Abortion is not an option. You know how I feel about it. Besides, it was the abortion my sister had years back that made her barren. Sandra froze. The blood drained from her face and she pressed herself closer to the wall, straining to hear every word. She pulled out her phone and began recording the conversation. Henry's voice followed, low and defensive. I love your sister. Judy, you pushed me into this. I didn't want any of this to happen. I don't want to break our marriage because of you. Sandra felt her heart shatter, piece by piece with every word. Her fingers trembled, and tears streamed down her face. She covered her mouth to stop herself from crying out loud. Judy's voice rose, sharp and angry. You will have to choose. Either you leave her for me, or I will tell her you raped me and got me pregnant. And you know she would do everything in her powers to put you behind bars. I have tried everything to win you over. What does she have that I don't? I'm more educated and beautiful than Sandra. I can represent you anywhere. But Sandra, she's old-fashioned and local. So it's you leave her for me or I will tell her you raped me. Sandra stood frozen by the window, her heart pounding as she replayed the betrayal she had just heard. She took a deep breath to calm herself and said, There's no need to do all of that. Judy, come and open the door and let me in. Inside, Judy and Henry stared at each other, panic evident in their eyes. Henry opened the door, looking pale and flustered, while Judy stood behind him, her face defiant but uneasy. Sandra stepped in and calmly placed her bag on the table. So, this is what you've been hiding from me. Judy, my own sister, Henry, the man I gave my heart to. Judy tried to speak. Sandra, I don't. Sandra raised her hand, stopping her mid-sentence. Her voice trembled with suppressed rage. I sacrificed my entire life for you, Judy. I gave up everything to make sure you had a future. And this is how you repay me, by betraying me in my own home, with my own husband? Judy's defiance crumbled, replaced by guilt. I'm sorry, Sandra. I didn't mean for this to happen. But what? Sandra's voice broke as tears streamed down her face. You meant every word I heard. You think you're better than me because you're educated? You think you deserve my husband because of your looks? Judy, I was your mother, your sister, and your father. How could you do this to me? Henry tried to intervene, his voice weak. Sandra, please. I made a mistake. Mistake? Sandra spun to face him. A mistake is forgetting our anniversary. A mistake is losing your temper. Sleeping with my sister and getting her pregnant is not a mistake, it's a choice. And you made that choice knowing how much I loved and trusted you. The room was silent except for Sandra's sobs. Judy stared at the floor, unable to meet her sister's eyes, while Henry fidgeted, unable to defend himself. Sandra finally straightened up, her voice firm. You can have him all to yourself. Judy, you're no longer my sister. As for you, Henry, don't even think of coming near me again. We're done. Judy began to cry. Sandra, please. I'm pregnant. I have nowhere to go. Sandra laughed bitterly. Did you think about that when you decided to betray me? You're on your own now, Judy, and don't think I'll pity you just because you're pregnant. I won't make the same mistake twice. And just so you know, I'm also carrying his child. With that, Sandra stormed into her room, leaving Judy and Henry in stunned silence. Over the next few days, Sandra began the process of rebuilding her life. She filed for divorce and moved out of the house Henry had given her, determined to stand on her own once again. As for Judy, she tried to reach out to Sandra, but every call and message was ignored. Sandra had closed that chapter of her life and vowed never to let betrayal define her future. Months later, Sandra gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Though life was tough as a single mother, she found strength in her daughter and vowed to give her the love and protection she never had. This story teaches us some important life lessons. Value loyalty and trust. The strongest relationships, whether with family or partners, are built on trust. Betrayal can leave wounds that are hard to heal. Choose forgiveness wisely. While forgiveness is powerful, not everyone deserves a second chance. Protect your peace by distancing yourself from toxic people. Never lose hope. Sandra's strength and resilience show us that even in the darkest times, we can rise above our challenges and create a better future. Set boundaries. Even with family, not everyone who shares your blood has your best interests at heart. Protect yourself by knowing when to let go of toxic relationships. Even with family members, please always remember that life is full of unexpected challenges, but your strength lies in how you handle them. Be strong, stand tall, and don't let betrayal define your story. Please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more interesting stories. Thank you for watching till the end.